Okay. So thanks everyone for staying. And today I'm going to be presenting a study we published recently in the journal Metabarcoding and Metagenomics. And it aimed at maximizing the reliability and the number of species being detected in a metabarcoding study. And I just want to show you my three other co-authors, Audrey, who led the paper, Claude, who provided all of the species taxonomic assignment and the reliability, and Eric, who initiated that project. So we all know that eDNA metabarcoding is a powerful tool to infer the presence of taxa. But we are also aware that there are some caveats, and we've seen in the recent presentation many ways that we try to improve those caveats. But for now, still, it's at least for the marine environment, inadequate for management implications. And why is this? It's mainly because, but one part of it is because the reliability of species or taxa assignment is either unknown or unclear. And there are ways to improve that reliability or to at least transmit it better. And at least at the genus level, we can provide reliable assignments, as shown in previous studies, using NCBINT. And using reference library, as others said in previous talk, can also achieve reliable species assignments. And how is that happening exactly? It's by getting all the sequence for the species you know are present in an area. You then eliminate sequence from the initial worldwide database that have erroneous species identification. And as an example, for the marine environment, we systematically identify a butterfly at 40 meters in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which is badly as wrong, or like a wrong species assignment on NCBI, and instead it's a sea star. One problem with that is that we can know for that one and recognize that butterfly as it comes up, but sequence accumulate continuously on NCBI, so errors too. And then like if you have someone dealing with the species assignment isn't that aware about which species should be observed or not, then you can miss that error. Another way that reference library are really useful is that it can improve your species assignment. For instance, if you're using NCBINT for tuna within the Gulf of St. Lawrence, then you will not get species assignment because of the shared haplotypes between tuna species. But then if you're using a reference library, there's only one tuna species, and it's the blue tuna species we have in the St. Lawrence, and so you'll get a species assignment. And another thing we had as the problems for our clients within DFO was that when we were providing our eDNA detection reports, is that they didn't understand the clear limitations there was in species assignment too. And so, two examples for fish species, eel pout, or for sand lens, there may be some taxonomic confusion. And again, reference sequence either on bold or on NCBI may not be exactly the right one, or it's really the taxonomist that cannot clearly make the difference between the species either. And there's also gaps, and those are an important also aspect that one should consider. For instance, for land sands, there are 3 species based on taxonomists in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, but for one of them, we didn't have reference sequence. So then you can't provide a species assignment that is reliable because for one of them, you don't know its sequence. Maybe it's shared, maybe it's different, but providing a reliable species assignment in that case is impossible. So we created a reference library for the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and species were selected by our clients from the marine protected area and other groups, and it included invertebrates. And because there's no mitogenome yet for all the species, we worked with CO1, which was retrieved from both systems. And there was a lot of efforts made by different groups for that marker in the university, the Franz Dufresne at UQAR, or even Paul Benston at BIO, to provide reference sequence for species in there. So it's really valuable. And then we added that step to that reference library, where for each species, we used a simple ranking system, either saying, is this reliable or unreliable due to gaps because of one species not having reference sequences, or is it unreliable because of haplotype sharing, or we use the bold information, the barcode index number sharing. And so for the Gulf of St. Lawrence library, we ended up with 1,300 sequences covering more than 400 species, and all of the reference sequence were from specimens from the Northwest Atlantic. And it was 197 families we got. And the initial list was 651 species that were targeted. So it's a really good recovery, more than like about 95% of core data were recovered. And if you look at this graph, you can see that for most of them, you can achieve reliable species assignment, and for some of them, not. And this is because of gaps or bin sharing, and some missing sequence are explaining at least the orange portion of this graph, this plot. And for invertebrates, well, it's lower, but still it's really good if you compare with other regions around the world. And publication, 58% of recovery for those species is quite good. But you see that there's a lot of gray in those other pies, and that the problem of lacking reference sequence is an important problem, and this provides unreliable species assignments due to gap. So, why does the Gulf of St. Lawrence likely not maximize species assignment? It's pretty obvious a bit from the figures I've presented you earlier, but we also have a species list for the Gulf of St. Lawrence, knowing that there are a bit more than 2,200 species of animals or metazoan inhabiting the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So we're missing 3/4 of the species being present. So for sure, we know that at least for CO1, well, our library is young and we would need more reference sequence. But this is also another problem with all reference library. If there is an invasive species coming in, or an unsuspected or a migrating species coming in, then you won't know because you're only relying on species that you know are present. So I was telling Audrey, so we're stuck. We did all that work, it took so long, but we're stuck again using NCBI. So, and we're also stuck not knowing how reliable it is. So Audrey, who's a brilliant person, said, like, maybe you could use our 1,300 sequence and blast them on NCBI and see how, what do we get as ranking for all of those 1,300 sequences. So that's what we did. And here's one of the figures presented in the paper. There's two panels, one for all of the taxa, the A panel, and the other panel is per taxonomic group. So you also see two different assignment methods being used, the last common ancestor and the blast up it method, and also 3 different thresholds, just to see like how that affected the assignment rate. And yet we can see there is a bit, it's expected. You see higher assignments or proportion of assignments using the blast up it method, which makes sense because you're assigning for sure to the best hit. So it makes sense, but what surprised us is that the proportion of inaccurate assignment was not that large. So still we could achieve good assignments even though we were using the Tuppet method. And if you looked at that like across all taxa, the accuracy varied between 80 to 82% for this data set at all threshold. And per taxonomy group, we only use the 97% threshold, and this varied between 69% for annelids and to 89% to arthropoda. So still, like, not too bad, like, at least not as bad as we'd expected. Another thing that we did is that we used a small barcoding data set and compared how it was performing the Gulf of St. Lawrence reference library and also NCBINT with the Tuppet method, 97%. And then those are the results. We get a total of 80 species being assigned. And for the 50%, the 50 species assigned both with NCBI and the Gulf of St. Lawrence, 78% of them were ranked as reliable. So again, not too bad, at least with NCBINT, with those taxa, which are most likely biased towards species that are easier to identify, but still. And we also get exclusive detection. And for the NCBINT, we identified 10 species that were likely being present and 8 that were unlikely because they were mostly from the Pacific or Indian Ocean. And also the Gulf of St. Lawrence reference library allowed to identify 7 species. So this showed that like both assignment approaches provided more answer for our data set or metabarcoding data set for CO1. So we ended up, at least for CO1, saying that we should use a 2-step approach for species assignment. First, using a regional library that can provide reliable species assignment, and then not neglecting the use of NCBINT because of the reference library lacking some reference sequence still. And we also recommend to report that we have no clue sometimes about the reliability of the taxonomic assignments that we're doing using NCBINT. And so some of our colleagues are coming to us saying like, well, this has been shown in this paper that the species is present using eDNA, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, well, we're sure, but not too sure about these species assignments sometimes with NCBINT. So I think this is a message to the community saying we should be clear about like what we're capable and what we're not using the World Wild Libraries repository. And so for the Gulf of St. Lawrence, we were able to achieve about 80% of species, reliable species assignment. But whatever about other regions, for the Arctic, likely it's much smaller than that after trying to work with this data. And for other marker, it's most likely better for 12S, which we work sometime with, often with, because it's mostly targeting chordata species. And then for other taxonomy group, well, it depends on the marker you're using, but you could be expecting less reliable or more reliable species assignment. But please have fun doing it too. I would like to thank the rest of the lab I'm working with for their comments on that presentation, and also a lot of discussion. DFO colleagues, which are really great for discussion and improving what we're doing, and also would like to show where we're working. It unfroze 2 weeks ago, but also some people that were really important in saying or pushing us to do that work that are from the Marine Conservation Target or the Ocean Protection Plan for us to provide accurate species assignment, and thanks to the national funding for species efforts. Thank you.